I pulled into the parking lot of Millstone Nuclear Power Station with my coffee still warm and my paperwork folder balanced on the passenger seat. The GPS had taken me down increasingly narrow roads until civilization seemed to disappear entirely, leaving just this sprawling concrete complex sitting behind chain-link fencing like it had been dropped here from another planet. The place looked exactly like what I'd expected from a nuclear facility, all straight lines and no-nonsense architecture, with massive cooling towers rising against the tree line. What I hadn't expected was how isolated it felt. Dense woods pressed right up against the perimeter fence on 3 sides, while the 4th opened to a rocky stretch of Connecticut coastline. The trees looked older than the plant itself, thick and dark even in late morning. I grabbed my folder and headed toward the main building, noting how quiet everything was outside the constant low buzz that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The machinery never stopped, apparently. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Something was always running here. The security checkpoint buzzed me through after I showed my ID and new employee paperwork. A guard with gray hair and reading glasses checked my name against a clipboard, then pointed me toward a set of glass doors marked Administration. "First day?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Maintenance technician." He nodded. "Joe Martinez will get you sorted. Good luck." The way he said it made me wonder if there was something specific I'd need luck with, but before I could ask, the doors opened and a man walked out who had to be Joe. He looked like he'd been working here since the place was built. Weathered face, tired eyes, and hands that showed decades of manual labor. His uniform was clean but worn, and he moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd done the same job thousands of times. "Michael Thompson?" His voice carried the weight of long nights and too much coffee. "That's me. Joe Martinez, maintenance supervisor." He shook my hand with a grip that felt like sandpaper. "Come on, let me show you around." He led me through a maze of corridors that all looked the same: white walls, fluorescent lighting, and tile floors polished to a dull shine. The whole place felt sterile in a way that went beyond just being clean. It was walking through a hospital where nothing bad had happened yet, but you could sense the potential for it hiding in every corner. "You worked nuclear before?" Joe asked as we walked. "Conventional power plants mostly. Some industrial maintenance. This is my first nuclear facility. Different animal entirely. Everything here runs on protocols. No improvising, no shortcuts, no creative problem solving. You follow procedures exactly as written every single time." We passed through several more corridors before Joe stopped at a heavy door marked Control Room, Authorized Personnel Only. He swiped his badge and the lock clicked open. "This is where you'll spend most of your time during night shifts," he said, pushing the door open. The control room was smaller than I'd imagined, with a curved bank of monitors and control panels that covered one entire wall. Rows of switches, gauges, and digital readouts created a complex pattern of lights and numbers that would have looked overwhelming if not for the clear labeling system. 3 large monitors mounted above everything else showed different camera feeds from around the plant. Monitor bank here shows feed from security cameras throughout the facility, Joe explained, pointing to the screens. "You'll need to check these regularly during your rounds." I nodded, trying to take in all the details. The room had 2 desks, one clearly for paperwork and administrative tasks, the other positioned to face the monitors. A coffee maker sat on a small table in one corner, along with a microwave and mini fridge. Everything looked lived in but organized. "Office is through here." Joe walked to another door at the back of the control room. This one was noticeably heavier than the others, with 2 deadbolt locks instead of just the electronic badge reader. "You'll need this space sometimes, door locks from the inside." The office was basic: a desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets, and no windows. The door felt solid when Joe closed it to show me the lock mechanism. Both deadbolts were heavy-duty, the kind you'd use on an exterior door. "Why the extra security?" I asked. Joe opened the door again instead of answering directly. "Let me show you the rest." We walked back through the control room to a set of large windows that looked out toward the main entrance. Rain streaks covered the glass, and I could see the security gate and visitor parking area beyond the fence. The woods pressed close on both sides, creating a natural corridor that led from the main road to the facility entrance. "You can see most of the perimeter from here," Joe said. "Important to keep an eye on things during night shifts." Expecting trouble? Not expecting, but prepared for it. He pulled a laminated card from his shirt pocket and handed it to me. The plastic was worn smooth around the edges, like it had been handled countless times. 4 rules were typed in bold letters. 1. If you see a woman with long, dark hair on monitor 3 at 2:13 a.m., do not acknowledge her. Look away immediately and do not look back for 5 minutes. 2. During rain, if a figure appears standing by the main entrance, do not leave the building until the rain stops completely. 3. If all lights go out and you hear footsteps in the corridors, lock yourself in the office immediately and wait for lights to return before emerging. 4. If Joe Martinez enters the control room twice in one shift, the second one is not Joe Martinez. Find a distraction and get to the office. I read through the list twice, waiting for Joe to crack a smile or explain the joke. When he didn't, I looked up to find him watching me with complete seriousness. "This is some kind of hazing thing, right?" I laughed, but it came out nervous and forced. "Mess with the new guy?" "No." His voice carried no humor whatsoever. "These are survival instructions. Every person who works night shift here has followed these rules for the past 7 years. The ones who didn't follow them exactly..." He paused, looking out the windows toward the woods. "Well, they don't work here anymore." My stomach dropped. The way he said it made it clear that "don't work here anymore" wasn't just about finding new jobs. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You just need to follow the rules exactly as written. No exceptions, no modifications, no creative interpretations. These 4 rules will keep you alive during your shifts here." I looked down at the card again. The rules seemed completely random. Times, specific monitors, weather conditions. Nothing about them made logical sense for a nuclear power plant. What happens if I don't follow them? Joe's expression didn't change. People get hurt, or worse. The machinery buzz seemed louder suddenly, filling the silence between us. I noticed how unnaturally quiet the building felt beyond that constant background noise. No voices, no footsteps, no sounds of normal human activity anywhere. How many people work night shift? Just you and me. Day shift has a full crew, but nights are different. Less personnel needed for monitoring and basic maintenance. He took the card back and handed me my own copy from his pocket. "Keep this with you at all times. Memorize it, but keep the card as backup." I slipped it into my wallet, feeling like I was playing along with something I didn't understand yet. "And you're serious about all this?" "Completely serious." Joe walked back to the monitor bank and tapped the screen showing the corridor feeds. 7 years I've worked nights here. I've seen things that would make you quit on the spot if I described them. But I've also seen what happens when people follow the rules exactly. They go home safe every morning. "What kind of things?" "The kind you'll see soon enough if you stay. And if you want to keep working here, you'll follow those rules without question when you do see them." I nodded, though I still felt like I was missing something crucial. The whole conversation felt surreal, like discussing emergency procedures for surviving a dragon attack. "When do I start?" "Tonight. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I'll be here for your first week to make sure you understand everything." Joe checked his watch. "Go home, get some sleep, eat a good dinner. Once you start working nights here, everything in your life changes." He walked me back through the hallways to the main entrance, pointing out bathroom locations, break rooms, and emergency exits along the way. The building felt even quieter during our return trip. At the security checkpoint, Joe stopped and turned to face me. "One more thing. If you decide this job isn't for you after tonight, No one will think less of you. Night shift here isn't for everyone. But if you stay, you follow the rules without exception. Understood? Understood. I walked back to my car with the laminated card in my wallet and a growing sense that I'd just accepted a job that was nothing like what I'd expected. The woods seemed closer somehow, pressing against the fence like they were trying to reclaim the cleared space around the plant. Starting the engine, I looked back at the building one more time. Joe stood at the glass doors, watching me go with that same serious expression he'd worn since we met. I walked through the plant's hallways for what felt like the 100th time, checking the same gauges and reading the same numbers I'd been watching for the past 3 nights. The flashlight beam swept across identical white walls as my footsteps carried through empty hallways, the only sound besides that constant mechanical buzz that never stopped. My first 2 shifts had passed without any sign of the weirdness Joe had warned me about. Just routine maintenance checks, equipment watching, and the occasional paperwork update. The whole place felt like any other industrial facility during overnight hours. Quiet, sterile, and boring enough to make me question why anyone needed those strange rules in the first place. The laminated card stayed in my wallet, but I'd barely thought about it since Tuesday. The rules felt increasingly paranoid as each normal hour passed. Watch a woman at 2:13 a.m., check for people in the rain, lock myself in an office if the lights went out. The longer I worked here without incident, the more it seemed like some elaborate prank or outdated procedure that nobody had bothered to update. I'd started to relax into the rhythm of night work. Coffee at midnight, equipment rounds at 1, paperwork catch-up until 3, then more watching until Joe finished his own patrol routes. We'd developed an easy working relationship. He handled the reactor building inspections while I managed the control systems and perimeter checks. Walking back toward the control room, I felt my shoulders relax for the first time since starting this job. Maybe nuclear facilities weren't as different from conventional power plants as Joe had made them seem. Maybe those stories about co-workers getting hurt were just accidents that got blown out of proportion over the years. I settled back at the screen bank with my coffee, pulling up the evening's maintenance logs on the computer. Numbers and diagnostic codes filled the screen as I cross-referenced them with the printed reports Joe had left for me. Everything looked normal, temperatures within range, pressure readings stable, no alerts or system warnings anywhere. The digital clock in the corner of the main screen read 2:11 a.m. I rubbed my eyes and stretched, feeling that common late-night tiredness starting to creep in even with the caffeine. 2 more hours until Joe returned from the reactor building, then we'd both finish up the work together. I clicked through to the next page of maintenance data, comparing pump efficiency ratings to last week's numbers. 2:12 a.m. Movement flashed in my peripheral vision. I looked up at the security camera feeds mounted above the main control panel. Screen 1 showed the main entrance, empty and well lit. Screen 2 displayed the break room area, also empty. Screen 3 showed Corridor B, the long hallway that connected the administrative section to the main plant floor. A woman stood in the corridor with her back to the camera. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. She had long dark hair that hung past her shoulders in wet, tangled strands. The hair looked soaked, like she'd just stepped out of a shower or been caught in heavy rain. She wore what looked like a hospital gown, thin white fabric that seemed to glow under the corridor's fluorescent lights. The woman stood completely still, not moving her weight, not moving her head, not even the slight sway that comes with normal breathing. She faced away from the camera toward the far end of the corridor, and I couldn't see any part of her face or hands. The clock changed to 2:13 a.m. My hand started reaching for the radio to call Joe, muscle memory kicking in before my brain caught up. Then, the first rule slammed back into my memory. If you see a woman with long dark hair on screen 3 at 2:13 a.m., do not acknowledge her. Look away immediately, and do not look back for 5 minutes. I jerked my hand away from the radio and forced my eyes down to the computer screen. The maintenance log numbers blurred together as I stared at them without seeing anything, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to look back at the screen. 5 minutes. I had to wait exactly 5 minutes. I fumbled for my watch with shaking hands, noting the second hand's position. 2:13 and 27 seconds. Count to 5 minutes from there. Don't look up. Don't acknowledge her. Don't do anything except wait. The coffee mug trembled in my grip as I set it down on the desk. I could feel the screen's glow above me, could sense that person standing motionless in the corridor, but I kept my eyes locked on the computer screen and tried to control my breathing. 2 minutes passed, then 3. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I found myself gripping the edge of the desk to keep them steady. The maintenance log became my entire world. Pressure readings, temperature data, anything to keep from looking up at screen 3. 4 minutes. Almost there. I counted the final 60 seconds in my head, each one stretching longer than it should have. When my watch finally showed that 5 full minutes had passed, I slowly raised my eyes to the screen bank. Corridor B was empty. The fluorescent lights lit up the same white walls and polished floor I'd walked through dozens of times over the past few nights. No woman, no hospital gown, no wet hair. Nothing but an empty hallway that looked exactly like it always did. I stared at the screen for another full minute, searching every corner for any sign of movement or shadow that might explain what I'd seen. The camera angle covered the entire corridor from one end to the other. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, no side passages or alcoves where someone could duck out of view. The woman had simply vanished. I grabbed my coffee with both hands and took a long drink, trying to process what had just happened. The rules weren't a joke or hazing ritual. They were exactly what Joe had said they were. Survival instructions for dealing with things that shouldn't exist, but apparently did. The radio crackled 20 minutes later, and Joe's voice filled the control room. "Thompson, this is Martinez. Finishing up reactor checks, heading back your way." "Copy that," I managed, surprised my voice sounded steady. He appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, badge reader beeping as he swiped in. One look at my face and he stopped, studying my expression with those tired eyes. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was probably the safest policy here. "I saw her, the woman with dark hair, on monitor 3 at 2:13. Joe nodded once, no surprise or concern in his expression. He walked over to his desk and started organizing some paperwork like I'd just mentioned, checking the weather. "Good thing you remembered the rules." That was it. No questions about details, no discussion of what the woman might have been or where she came from. Just a simple acknowledgement that yes, these things happened here, and yes, following the rules was the only thing that mattered. His matter-of-fact response somehow made the whole experience feel more scary than if he'd acted shocked or disbelieving. The casual way he accepted something so completely impossible suggested this was just another normal part of working at Millstone Nuclear Power Station. I sat back in my chair and tried to focus on the remaining maintenance logs, but my hands kept shaking for the rest of the shift. I sat at the monitor bank 3 nights after seeing the woman in the corridor, trying to convince myself that following the rules was becoming easier. The maintenance logs spread across my desk looked routine enough. Temperature readings, pressure checks, equipment status reports. Normal work for a normal job, except nothing about this place felt normal anymore. My hands had stopped shaking as much when I checked the security feeds, though I still found myself avoiding monitor 3 whenever the clock approached 2:13 a.m. The laminated card stayed in my shirt pocket now instead of my wallet, close enough to grab whenever doubt crept in about whether I'd actually seen what I thought I'd seen. Joe had finished his reactor building patrol an hour ago and was somewhere in the administrative wing, checking ventilation systems. His radio crackled occasionally with status updates, the static filling the control room's quiet spaces between the constant mechanical noise. I'd grown used to working alone during these stretches, though I kept the office door propped open behind me, just in case. The first drops of rain hit the windows around midnight, light tapping that gradually built into a steady drumbeat against the glass. I looked up from the computer screen to watch water streak down the large windows facing the main entrance, distorting the view of the security gate and visitor parking area beyond the fence. Storm clouds had been building all evening, dark masses that blocked out whatever moonlight might have reached the facility. The rain got stronger quickly, turning from gentle drops to heavy sheets that hid everything past the fence line. I could barely make out the tree line through the downpour, just vague shapes where the woods pressed against the perimeter. Back to the maintenance logs. Pump efficiency ratings needed cross-referencing with last month's data, and Joe had left notes about a cooling system inspection scheduled for next week. I clicked through the computerized reports, trying to focus on numbers and technical specifications instead of the way rain hammered against the windows with increasing force. Lightning flashed at 1:30 a.m., lighting up the entrance area in stark white light for just a second. In that brief moment, I saw the figure. It stood perfectly still by the main gate, maybe 20 feet from the security checkpoint. Tall, wearing what looked like dark clothing that should have been soaked through by now. The lightning faded, leaving only darkness and rain, but the image burned into my vision. Someone standing motionless in a downpour that would have sent any normal person running for shelter. I grabbed the radio, then stopped. Rule 2 crashed back into my memory before I could key the transmit button. During rain, if a figure appears standing by the main entrance, do not leave the building until the rain stops completely. The radio went back on the desk. I changed to the security camera feed that covered the entrance area, leaning forward to study the monitor. Rain created gray static across the image, making it hard to distinguish details, but something dark definitely stood near the gate. The figure remained completely motionless, not the small movements of someone trying to stay warm or dry, not even the slight sway that comes with breathing. Another lightning flash confirmed what the camera showed. The figure hadn't moved at all, hadn't changed position or turned its head or shown any sign of being affected by the storm. Water should have been running off its clothes, but instead it just stood there like a statue someone had placed in the rain. I watched the monitor for the next 2 hours, checking every few minutes as lightning continued to flicker across the sky. The figure never moved. Not once. Rain pounded down hard enough to create small rivers in the parking lot. Wind bent the trees beyond the fence, but whatever stood by the gate remained perfectly still through all of it. My coffee went cold as I alternated between the maintenance logs and the security feed, unable to concentrate on either one properly. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. Thunder rumbled constantly now, and rain streaked the windows so heavily I couldn't see anything beyond the immediate vicinity of the building. At 3:30 a.m., the storm began to weaken. Rain lightened from sheets to steady drops, then to occasional sprinkles. Lightning moved farther away, thunder becoming distant rumbles instead of immediate crashes. I kept watching the security monitor, waiting for the moment when the rain stopped completely. 3:45 a.m. The last drops fell from the sky, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the building's roof and gutters. I looked at the monitor again. The entrance area was empty. No figure by the gate, no dark shape near the security checkpoint. Just wet pavement reflecting the facility's lights and puddles that would drain away before morning. I changed between different camera angles, checking every view that covered the entrance and surrounding areas. Nothing moved anywhere on the grounds. Whatever had been standing in the rain for over 2 hours had simply vanished the moment the storm ended. I filed the incident in the logbook with a brief entry. Figure saw near main entrance during storm, 1:30 to 3:45 a.m. No action taken per protocol. Joe would see it during shift change and probably nod the same way he had when I'd mentioned the woman on monitor 3. Just another night at Millstone. Just another rule that had kept me safe by doing exactly what it said. 2 weeks passed before the next major incident occurred. I'd settled into the rhythm of night shifts more completely, my paranoia changing from constant terror to watchful caution. The rules had proven themselves twice now, and following them exactly had kept me safe both times. I still carried the laminated card, still checked the security monitors obsessively, but the work itself was becoming routine. I was organizing supply closets in the administrative wing around 2 a.m., checking inventory against printed lists and making notes about items that needed reordering. Boxes of maintenance supplies lined metal shelves, everything labeled and sorted according to some system that probably made sense to whoever had designed it years ago. My flashlight beam swept across cleaning chemicals, spare parts, and technical manuals as I counted items and marked them off the checklist. The lights went out without warning. Complete darkness swallowed the supply closet, the hallway beyond, and presumably the entire building. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, but nothing happened. No dim red glow, no battery-powered exit signs, nothing but absolute black that made me feel like I'd gone blind. Heavy footsteps began bouncing through the hallways, slow, deliberate steps that sounded like work boots on tile flooring. Each footfall rang out clearly in the silence, moving down the corridor in my direction. Not the quick pace of someone checking on power outages or looking for breaker panels. These steps moved with purpose, getting closer to where I stood frozen in the supply closet doorway. Rule 3 slammed into my mind with perfect clarity. If all lights go out and you hear footsteps in the corridors, lock yourself in the office immediately and wait for lights to return before emerging. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. The beam cut through darkness as I sprinted down hallways I'd memorized over the past few weeks. The footsteps continued behind me, maintaining their steady pace but somehow managing to keep up with my panicked running. Left turn toward the control room, straight through the main corridor, badge reader beeping as I swiped into the control area. The office door was exactly where it should be. I slammed it shut and turned both deadbolts, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the heavy locks in the dark. The clicks sounded impossibly loud in the silence, but they also felt like the most secure sounds I'd ever heard. I crawled under the desk and turned off my flashlight, not wanting to give away my exact position. The office plunged into complete darkness as I pulled my knees to my chest and tried to control my breathing. The footsteps had stopped, but I could hear something moving around outside the door. Not walking, moving, like something was checking the control room, examining equipment, or searching for something. Soft sounds that might have been papers being moved or chairs being adjusted. Whatever was out there took its time, methodical and patient in a way that made my skin crawl. I counted minutes in my head, trying to track how long I'd been hiding. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The sounds continued sporadically. Sometimes silence, sometimes the soft noise of something investigating the room beyond the door. I pressed my back against the desk's solid wood and tried not to think about what might be looking for me. The lights returned suddenly, fluorescent bulbs flickering to life with their normal noise. I could see the desk above me, the filing cabinets along the walls, the normal office environment that felt like the safest place in the world. But I stayed under the desk and counted 10 full minutes before reaching for the door locks. The control room was exactly as I'd left it. Maintenance logs still spread across my usual desk, coffee mug sitting where I'd abandoned it, security monitors showing their normal feeds. Nothing looked disturbed or moved. If something had been searching the room, it had left no trace of its presence. Joe's voice crackled over the radio a few minutes later. "Thompson, you okay? We had a power surge in the reactor building. Everything back to normal?" "All good here," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Lights just came back on. I didn't mention the footsteps or the hiding or the sounds outside the office door. Joe had read about it in the logbook when he returned from his patrol, and he'd probably nod the same way he always did when the rules proved themselves necessary. 3 rules now. 3 times I'd followed them exactly and stayed safe. The pattern was becoming clear. Millstone Nuclear Power Station had its own version of normal, and survival meant accepting that without question. My hands wouldn't stop checking the laminated card. 3 weeks had passed since the lights went out and something walked through the hallways, and I'd pulled that card from my shirt pocket at least 50 times each shift. The corners were getting worn from my fingers tracing the edges, the text slightly smudged from oils on my skin. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3, Rule 4. Over and over until I could recite them without reading. Sleep had become nearly impossible during daylight hours. Every small noise in my apartment sent me bolt upright. Every shadow outside the bedroom window looked wrong somehow. I'd installed extra locks on the front door and started keeping all the curtains closed, but it didn't help much. The paranoia followed me home and stayed there, waiting. I brought 2 extra thermoses of coffee to work now instead of just one. Caffeine was the only thing keeping me functional during the long stretches between Joe's patrols. I'd position one thermos by the monitors, another by the computer, and a third one near the office door. I never had to walk more than a few steps without access to something that would keep me awake and alert. The chair situation had gotten out of hand too. I'd started dragging office chairs from the break room and positioning them against the door whenever I needed to leave the control room for supply checks or equipment rounds. Not exactly barricading. Joe would notice if I really blocked anything, but enough extra weight that opening the door would make noise. Early warning system for whatever might try to follow me around. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like someone else entirely. 20 pounds lighter than when I'd started, with dark circles under my eyes that makeup wouldn't cover even if I'd worn makeup. My cheekbones stood out sharper than they should have, and my shirts hung loose around my shoulders. The stress was eating me alive from the inside out. Tonight felt worse than usual. Storm clouds had been building since sunset, thick black masses that blocked out the stars and made the facility feel more isolated than normal. Rain started around 10 p.m., light drops that gradually built into heavy sheets against the windows. By midnight, lightning was flashing constantly, lighting up the empty parking lot and fence line in stark, white bursts. I sat at the monitor bank with my hands wrapped around a coffee mug, trying to focus on the maintenance logs while thunder rumbled overhead. The numbers blurred together as I cross-referenced pump efficiency data with last week's reports. Concentrate on the work. Just normal industrial maintenance. Nothing supernatural about checking equipment temperatures and pressure readings. Lightning struck close enough to rattle the windows, and I jumped so hard that coffee sloshed onto the desk. My heart pounded as I grabbed paper towels to clean up the spill, hands shaking badly enough that I knocked over a pen holder in the process. Pens scattered across the floor, rolling under desks and behind equipment. I crawled around collecting them, feeling ridiculous for being so jumpy over a thunderstorm. Just weather, just rain and wind and electrical activity that happened all the time. Nothing to do with the rules or the woman with dark hair or the figure that stood motionless by the gate. Just a normal storm on a normal night at a normal nuclear facility. Another lightning flash filled the control room with white light, and for just a second I saw something moving in the corridor beyond the glass doors. My breath caught as I froze on hands and knees, staring at the doorway where shadows moved in ways that didn't match the lightning patterns. Nothing there. Just tricks of light and exhaustion, and too much coffee over too many sleepless nights. I got back to my feet and returned to the monitor bank, trying to convince myself that paranoia was making me see things that didn't exist. But what if it wasn't paranoia? What if there really was something in the hallway, something that the rules didn't cover because it was new or different or worse than what previous night workers had encountered? The laminated card only had 4 rules. What happened when I ran into situation number 5? Rain pounded against the windows with increasing force, creating rivers that ran down the glass and distorted everything beyond. The parking lot lights became blurred halos through the water, and the fence line disappeared entirely behind gray sheets of precipitation. Lightning continued to flash overhead, each burst revealing emptiness where my paranoid mind expected to see figures standing in the storm. I pulled out the rules card again. Rule 2 clearly stated not to leave the building during rain if a figure appeared by the main entrance. I checked the security monitor. Entrance area looked empty as far as I could tell through the static created by heavy rainfall. But what if I'd missed something? What if there was a figure out there and I just couldn't see it clearly enough through the storm? The coffee wasn't helping anymore. 3 thermoses worth of caffeine just made my hands shake worse while doing nothing for the bone-deep exhaustion that had been building for weeks. I needed sleep, real sleep, not the anxious dozing I managed during daylight hours with every sound making me jump. My reflection in the computer monitor looked hollow-eyed and desperate. This wasn't sustainable. Nobody could work like this indefinitely, constantly terrified and second-guessing every shadow and sound. But leaving meant going back to regular maintenance work where supernatural rules didn't exist, where the pay was lower and the job security was questionable. Thunder crashed overhead, loud enough to vibrate through the building's concrete structure. Lightning followed immediately, lighting up the control room in harsh white light that made every shadow look wrong. I gripped the edge of the desk and tried to control my breathing, but the panic was building faster than I could contain it. Everything was too much. The isolation, the rules, the constant fear of making a mistake that would cost more than just my job. The woman with dark hair, the figure in the rain, the footsteps in darkened corridors. Week after week of supernatural encounters that shouldn't exist, but definitely did, each one proving that reality worked differently here than anywhere else. The pressure built behind my eyes as another lightning flash filled the room. My chest felt tight, breathing becoming difficult as the full weight of working at this place crashed down on me all at once. Weeks of suppressed terror and exhaustion broke through whatever barriers I'd constructed to keep functioning. I put my head down on the desk and started crying. Not just tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere I'd been keeping locked away since my first night here. All the fear I'd pushed down, all the stress I'd tried to manage with coffee and paranoid preparation, all the desperate hope that following rules would be enough to keep me safe. It poured out of me in waves that left me gasping and shaking at the monitor bank. Rain continued to pound against the windows as I sobbed into my arms, letting weeks of accumulated terror finally have their way with me. Lightning flickered overhead. Thunder rumbled through the building, and I cried harder than I had since childhood. The control room felt like the loneliest place in the world, surrounded by empty corridors and supernatural threats that defied every rational thing I'd ever believed. "Thompson?" Joe's voice came from the doorway, quiet and concerned. I looked up to find him standing there with rain dripping from his jacket, badge reader still beeping from his entry. His weathered face showed no surprise at finding me crying at my desk. Just the same patient expression he wore when explaining equipment procedures. He walked over and sat down in the chair beside mine, not saying anything for a long moment. Just sitting there while I tried to get control of my breathing and wipe the tears from my face with shirt sleeves that were already damp from crying. "What's wrong?" he asked finally. The question broke something loose inside me again. "I'm scared," I managed to say between ragged breaths. "I'm terrified all the time, and I don't understand how you do this. How you work here night after night for 7 years without losing your mind." Joe nodded slowly, like this was a conversation he'd had before. "It gets easier." "Does it really? Because I feel like I'm falling apart. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I jump at every sound. I check those rules 50 times a shift, and I'm still convinced I'm going to mess up and something terrible is going to happen." He was quiet for another moment, looking out at the storm through the windows. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his profile as he considered his words. "This place has always been different," he said finally. "Something about where it's located, or maybe what we're doing here, attracts things that normal people can't explain. Been that way since before I started working here. Probably will be that way long after we're both gone. But the rules keep us safe? They do. Long as you follow them exactly every time without trying to get creative or make improvements. Those rules were written by people who figured out how to survive here, and they work as long as you trust them completely." I wiped my eyes again, feeling a little better just from having someone to talk to about this. "Have you really lost co-workers who didn't follow them?" Joe's face got more serious. "2 people over the years. Both thought they knew better than the rules. One decided he could handle whatever was in the hallways during a blackout without hiding in the office. Found him the next morning in the reactor building, and he'd aged about 20 years overnight. Hair white, skin wrinkled, but still breathing. Had to retire on medical leave and never talked about what happened. He stopped, looking out at the storm again. The other one was a woman who worked day shifts but picked up some night hours for extra money. Saw the figure by the main entrance during a rainstorm and decided she was going to get a better look, see what it actually was. Went outside while it was still raining. What happened to her? Never came back inside. Security cameras showed her walking toward the fence, then nothing. We found her car in the parking lot the next morning. Keys still in the ignition, but she was gone. Plant management reported her as a missing person, but the police never found any trace. The weight of those stories settled over me, but somehow they were almost comforting. Proof that the rules existed for good reasons, that following them exactly was the difference between going home safe and disappearing entirely. "You're doing everything right," Joe continued, his voice taking on a reassuring tone. "Taking the rules seriously, not trying to investigate or understand things that don't need understanding. That's exactly what you should be doing. It doesn't feel like enough sometimes. It is enough. Fear keeps you careful, and careful keeps you alive. The fact that you're scared means you're smart enough to respect what we're dealing with here." Thunder rumbled overhead, but it seemed less threatening now with Joe sitting beside me. The control room felt less isolated, less like a tiny pocket of safety surrounded by supernatural dangers. Still dangerous, still requiring constant attention, but manageable with the right perspective. "How do you stay calm about it all?" Joe smiled slightly, the first real smile I'd seen from him since starting this job. 7 years of practice. And knowing that every night I follow the rules exactly is another night I go home to my family. The fear never goes away completely, but it becomes something you can work with instead of something that works against you. He reached over and patted my shoulder, which felt surprisingly fatherly. "I'm proud of how well you're getting used to this job. Most people would have quit after the first supernatural encounter, but you're sticking with it and learning how to survive here. That takes real strength." The rain was beginning to slow down outside, heavy sheets becoming steady drops against the windows. Lightning moved farther away, thunder becoming distant rumbles instead of immediate crashes. The storm was passing, leaving the facility looking washed and clean in the security lights. I felt better than I had in weeks, not because the fear was gone, but because someone understood what I was going through and confirmed that my approach was working. The rules would keep me safe as long as I followed them. The terror was normal and healthy rather than a sign that I was losing my mind. Joe stood up and straightened his jacket, preparing to resume his patrol routes. "Finish up the maintenance logs, then get some rest. Tomorrow night will be easier, and the night after that will be easier still. You're going to do just fine here, Thompson." He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. "And remember, the fact that you're scared means you're smart. Keep being smart. Keep following the rules, and you'll be working here as long as you want to." The badge reader beeped as he left, returning me to the familiar quiet of night shift work. But being alone felt less heavy now, more like focused concentration than desperate survival. I pulled out the laminated card one more time, running my fingers over the worn edges as I looked through the 4 rules. They would keep me safe. Joe had been doing this for 7 years, and he went home to his family every morning because he followed them exactly. I could do the same thing. The maintenance logs waited on my desk, numbers and technical specifications that needed cross-referencing with equipment reports. Normal work for someone who happened to work in an abnormal place. I opened the first file and got back to the business of being a night shift maintenance technician at Millstone Nuclear Power Station. I'd found a rhythm over the past week that felt almost sustainable. Coffee at 11, equipment logs by 11:15, then security monitor checks while Joe handled his first patrol of the reactor building. The conversation we'd had during that thunderstorm had changed something inside me, not getting rid of the fear, but turning it into focused caution instead of paralyzing terror. Joe was right about fear keeping me careful. Careful kept me alive. The maintenance report spread across my desk looked routine enough. Temperature readings from the cooling systems, pressure data from the main pumps, equipment status updates that matched the previous week's patterns, numbers and technical specifications that represented normal industrial operations, the kind of work I'd done at conventional power plants without ever worrying about supernatural encounters. Joe finished organizing his patrol checklist and clipped the radio to his belt, the same methodical preparation he went through every night. He'd been doing these reactor building inspections for 7 years, following identical routes and procedures that had kept him safe through countless encounters with whatever called this place home. "Standard sweep tonight," he said, checking his watch. "Should be back around 12:30, maybe 1 if I find anything that needs immediate attention." "I'll be here," I replied, settling into the familiar routine of solo monitor duty. The badge reader beeped as Joe left the control room at exactly 11:30 p.m., his footsteps carrying down the hallway toward the reactor building access. I watched his progress on the security monitors until he disappeared around a corner, leaving me alone with the constant mechanical buzzing and the soft glow of equipment displays. Back to the logbooks. Pump efficiency data needed cross-referencing with last month's reports, and there were notes about a scheduled maintenance window next week that required planning. I clicked through computerized records, comparing current readings to historical averages, looking for patterns or problems that might indicate developing issues. The work felt grounding in a way I hadn't expected, just technical analysis and data management, the same skills I'd used at every job since finishing my maintenance certification. Millstone might have its supernatural oddities, but the equipment still operated according to normal physical laws. Pumps moved water, generators produced electricity, cooling systems managed heat, basic industrial processes that made sense. I was updating pressure readings when Joe walked back into the control room. "That was quick," I said without looking up from the computer screen. "Find everything in good shape?" "Need you to come with me," Joe replied. "Cooling system inspection, something I want you to see." His voice sounded different, higher pitched than usual, with an odd rhythm that didn't match his normal speech patterns. I looked over at him, and something cold settled in my stomach. Joe stood by the doorway, but his posture was wrong. Too straight, too rigid, like someone trying to stand the way they thought Joe would stand. His movements looked mechanical when he moved his weight, lacking the natural flow that came from decades of working in the same environment. But it was his eyes that made my hands start shaking. They were too bright under the fluorescent lights, reflecting in a way that human eyes shouldn't reflect. Not the normal shine of moisture or the slight glint that came from certain angles. These eyes caught the light and held it, creating an unnatural brightness that made him look like he was lit from within. "Thompson?" he said again, and the voice was definitely wrong. Still recognizably Joe's vocal patterns, but pitched higher and lacking the weathered quality that came from years of night shift work. "We need to check those cooling systems now." I forced myself to look back at the computer screen, buying time to think. Rule 4 crashed into my memory with perfect clarity. If Joe Martinez entered the control room twice in one shift, the second one was not Joe Martinez, requiring Michael to find a distraction and get to the office. Joe had left 30 minutes ago. This thing that looked like Joe had walked back into the control room, violating the most specific rule on the laminated card. The real Joe was still somewhere in the reactor building, doing his normal patrol, completely unaware that something else was wearing his appearance. I looked at Joe's usual desk, hoping to see his cell phone or radio or something that would let me verify his identity. The phone sat exactly where he'd left it, plugged into its charging cable. No way to call him, no way to confirm whether this was really him or something else entirely. "Thompson, we need to go," the fake Joe said, agitation creeping into his voice. "Cooling system irregularities require immediate inspection." Real Joe would never use that phrase. He'd say something like, "Water temps look off," or "Pumps are acting weird." The formal language didn't match his personality at all, like something that had learned technical terms, but not the casual way humans actually talked. I kept my eyes on the computer screen, trying to look focused on the maintenance logs while my mind went through options. Rule 4 said to find a distraction and get to the office. But what kind of distraction would work? How could I redirect the attention of something supernatural enough to perfectly copy Joe's appearance? "I'm in the middle of cross-referencing the pump data," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. "Can you give me 5 minutes to finish this section?" The thing that looked like Joe stepped further into the control room, and I could hear the difference in its footsteps. Real Joe moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd been walking these corridors for years. This thing's steps sounded too deliberate, too precisely placed, like it was thinking about how to move instead of acting on muscle memory. "The cooling systems can't wait," it insisted, voice rising slightly. "We need to inspect them together immediately." That was wrong too. Joe would never insist on joint inspections for routine maintenance. He'd handle problems himself and call for backup only if the situation needed specialized knowledge or extra hands. The fake Joe was pushing for something the real Joe would never request. My hands shook as I reached for a pen, trying to make the movement look natural. The office door was maybe 15 feet away, with the fake Joe positioned between me and safety. I needed something that would grab its attention long enough for me to sprint across the room. "Thompson, stop ignoring me," the imposter said, and now its voice carried an edge that Joe's never had. Sharp and demanding in a way that didn't match his patient personality. "We're going to the cooling systems now." I gripped the pen tighter, measuring the distance to the far wall. If I could throw it hard enough to make serious noise when it hit, maybe that would give me the split-second distraction I needed. The fake Joe took another step closer, and I caught the scent of something metallic and cold, like machinery that had been running in winter air. Nothing like the coffee and cigarette smell that usually clung to Joe's work clothes. "Right now, Thompson," it said, voice becoming more distorted with each word. "We're leaving for the cooling systems immediately." I wound up and hurled the pen as hard as I could toward the far wall. The pen struck a filing cabinet with a sharp metallic clang that carried through the control room. The imposter's head snapped toward the sound with mechanical precision, moving too fast and too completely, like a surveillance camera tracking movement. I ran, 15 feet across the control room, past the fake Joe that was still turning its head back toward me with that same unnatural speed. The office door was exactly where it should be, heavy wood with 2 deadbolt locks that represented the only safety in the entire facility. I slammed the door behind me and turned both locks, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. The clicks sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence, but they also felt like the most secure sounds I'd ever heard. Heavy footsteps came toward the door, but they didn't sound like work boots on tile anymore. Each step made a scraping noise, like metal dragging across the floor, followed by impacts that were too hard and too precise. "Thompson!" the voice called through the door. But it was changing. Still recognizably derived from Joe's vocal patterns, but distorting into something that human throats couldn't produce. Lower and higher at the same time, with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Open this door immediately." I crawled under the desk and tried to control my breathing. The office went into darkness as I switched off the flashlight, not wanting to give away my exact position. The fake Joe pounded on the door with impacts that shook the frame, but the deadbolts held. "You can't hide in there forever," it said, voice becoming more distorted with each word. The harmonics were worse now, creating overtones that seemed to vibrate through the building's structure. "We have work to do, Thompson. Cooling systems require immediate inspection." The pounding continued for several minutes, getting more violent and losing its rhythm. Sometimes it sounded like fists hitting wood, sometimes like something harder and sharper trying to break through. The voice kept calling my name, but it no longer sounded like Joe's voice at all. Whatever was outside the door had given up pretending and showed something that spoke in sounds that made my bones hurt. Then everything went quiet. I stayed under the desk, counting minutes in my head while listening for any sound that might mean movement outside the door. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no pounding. Just the normal buzz of building systems and the occasional crackle from Joe's radio that he'd left on his desk. 30 minutes passed before the radio crackled with static. "Thompson, you there?" Joe's voice came through clearly, with all the normal patterns and inflections I'd learned to recognize. "Finishing up the reactor sweep, everything looks good down here." I stayed under the desk and counted 10 more minutes before responding. "All good here too. See you when you get back." The badge reader beeped 45 minutes later, and Joe's real footsteps carried down the hall. I listened carefully to the rhythm and beat, comparing them to what I'd heard from the fake one. Real Joe moved with the natural flow of someone completely comfortable in his space, not the mechanical precision of something trying to copy human movement. I unlocked the office door and found Joe organizing his patrol notes at his usual desk, cell phone still plugged into its charger exactly where he'd left it. His appearance was normal. Weathered face, tired eyes, work clothes that smelled like coffee and machinery oil. No unnatural brightness, no metallic smell, no stiff posture. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Rule 4, I said simply. Joe's expression grew serious immediately. He set down his paperwork and looked at me with the same patient attention he'd shown during the thunderstorm conversation. "Tell me what happened." I described the encounter step by step. The wrong voice, the mechanical movements, the 2 bright eyes, the insistence on joint cooling system inspection. Joe listened without interruption, nodding occasionally when details matched patterns he'd seen before. "Good job following the rules exactly," he said when I finished. "That pen throw was smart thinking. Gives them something to focus on while you get to safety." "Them?" "Whatever creates those imposters. Been happening here for years, long before I started working nights. Something that can copy appearances and basic personality traits, but never gets the details quite right." Joe opened a filing cabinet and pulled out an incident report form, the same type we used for equipment malfunctions or safety violations. He started filling in the standard information: date, time, location, personnel involved. "We'll document everything exactly as it happened," he said, writing in careful block letters. "Plant management needs records of supernatural encounters, even if they don't officially acknowledge what they mean." "Has this happened to you?" 3 times over the years. Always follows the same pattern. Imposter shows up when the real person is somewhere else, insists on immediate inspection or maintenance that requires leaving safe areas. Never gets aggressive until you refuse to cooperate, then drops the disguise completely. He finished the incident report and handed it to me for review. Every detail I described was recorded in technical language that made the encounter sound like routine equipment failure rather than supernatural imposture. "You did everything right," Joe continued, his voice taking on the same reassuring tone from our thunderstorm conversation. "Recognized something was wrong, remembered the correct rule, executed the procedure exactly as written. That's textbook survival behavior for this place." I signed the report and watched Joe file it away with dozens of similar forms, evidence of supernatural encounters that happened regularly enough to require standardized documentation procedures. "The fact that you're still here means you're serious about making this work," Joe said, closing the filing cabinet. "Most people would have quit after their first imposter encounter. Shows real commitment to the job." He was right. I could leave right now, walk out to my car and drive home and never come back to Millstone Nuclear Power Station. Find work at a regular facility where the worst-case scenario was equipment failure or workplace accidents, not supernatural entities that wore faces I recognized and tried to trick workers into dangerous situations. But the rules had saved me again. 4 encounters now. 4 times I'd followed the procedures exactly and come out okay. The pattern was clear. Survival was possible here, as long as I trusted the laminated card completely and never tried to improvise or understand things that didn't need understanding. "I'm staying," I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. "This job pays well and the rules work as long as I follow them." Joe smiled, the same fatherly look from our last talk. "Good to hear. You're turning into exactly the kind of night shift worker this place needs. Smart enough to be scared, careful enough to follow procedures, tough enough to keep working here no matter what happens." The rest of the shift went by without any problems. Normal maintenance logs, routine equipment checks, standard procedures that belonged in any industrial facility. But the incident report sat in Joe's filing cabinet with all the others, proof that normal and supernatural lived together here in ways that made no sense. The rules were my protection. 4 simple procedures that made the difference between going home safe and disappearing into whatever existed in the shadows of Millstone Nuclear Power Station. I would follow them exactly, every time without exception or creative interpretation. That was how I'd survive here for as long as I chose to stay.